Okay, so in this video, we're actually going to go ahead and start setting up the plumbing for our Angular app and also the Angular templates that we're going to use to represent the HTML. And this is going to be like the first step towards in activating our application or using Angular to represent or to define a lot of our functions. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things that we did last time was that we went ahead and mapped over the master page from the design. We also set up our environment for the lesson prior to that. So everything was pretty traditional or trivial. Not really trivial. I mean, there's some tips and tricks in there, but really nothing earth-shattering. I think this video will really start to add a lot of value in the sense that we actually going to start setting up Angular to represent the features or custom development within SharePoint. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and navigate down to the modules.js. And here, you're going to see a lot of syntax as far as like defining, setting up the Angular plumbing. A lot of the stuff that we're going to do today is going to be one time. And then we're going to get into the meat of it to where it's going to be repeatable anytime that we want to fire up a new feature or we need to add new capabilities. We'll walk through that. So the first thing we want to do is set up our module. And this is the key piece for any AngularJS app. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just set this to a global variable called JP_app. And this is the Angular syntax that only works if you have Angular library referenced, right? So Angular module, and you want to give it a name. So this is going to be our JP_app, JP for job portal. And then you're going to just pass it an empty array, and that's it. So now our Angular module is defined. Let me just double check. I don't have any syntax error. I actually have a working application in another window. So I will be bouncing back and forth just to make sure there's no syntax issues. Okay, so now this is all wired up. So that's our JP_app. And if we save this off, the second thing we have to do, now we have our module defined. We have to actually reference this in our master page. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go ahead and reference this in the HTML tag. And so this is going to make it available in the master page. If we reference it in the HTML tag, this is going to make it available anywhere that we need to use the Angular module or any Angular functionality. Give me 1 second here. I'm missing. Just referencing this in another window, and I actually did not define it there. I think I defined it at the body tag, maybe? No. All right, let's just define it here, and if we run into any issues, we'll correct it. All right, so basically it's going to be ng_app, and that's the Angular syntax, and basically just reference the job portal name. So in Angular, let's just go back to the module. This is where we define the module. So you will see this syntax or this pattern very similar in many different layers in Angular. So this is how we define the module. We give it a name, then we pass it parameters. It's this name that you want to reference, not so much this guy. And I kind of hate that because, you know, when I give these two the same name, it seems like they're one and the same, but they're different. So this is just a global variable, has nothing to do with the HTML. We can just call this Angular 23, right? JP_app 23, set the module equal to that. In the HTML, this is the guy that you're referencing, right? So let's go back to the HTML. So basically it's ng_app and then that name, and we should be wired and good to go. Now, this global variable here, this is used for when I define other services and components. It just makes, because you have to reference this module, I'm just storing this module locally here, so that way I don't have to carry this long name with me in other files. So let's go ahead and define our services. Now, the way that this is set up, the services, so components and services are really where you're going to live. The modules, not so much. I think you probably only hear like 3-4% of the time, probably like in the entire application. It's only when you have to bring in external libraries that you would be modifying this module. So this is one of those set and forget. Only you need it when you have to do something um, additional within your application as the complexity or the capabilities grow and you need external services. The components and services is where you actually will kind of live, right? So the services, just imagine this, if you're from the C# background, which I know most of you guys are, um, the services is more of like a C# library, right? This is where we have all the repeatable methods and the functionality in the business. I would say the business layer, but there's going to be a little data layer here as well, but that's going to be very minimal, right? Because our repository is either going to be the SharePoint out-of-box REST API or custom REST API. So all of that functionality is going to live here. We're not going to split that up into 2 to 3 different levels. Just one level, keep it pretty flat. The components is really going to represent very similar to a user control, to where there's going to be a front end and there's going to be a back end. The front end is going to be in a different file called the HTML. The templates, and the back end is where the components will live. And you will see something very similar to like a page load event. That's an on-init event, and that's where you want to go and get all your data before the DOM is rendered, and so that way you have it before you pass it to the front end. So let's define our services, because the components are, every component depends on the service in order to get the data. So let's define that. So the way that the best practice that I've seen, right, what we're going to call is, you see this double parenthesis, right? This is the primer for they call it a anonymous self-activating or self-executing function. So basically, let me just back up. So the anonymous function looks like this: curly brackets, and that's that, I think, right? I'm not 100% on the syntax. So this is the anonymous function. Now to execute that or to call it, you have to have this other parenthesis. So basically what I do, I just do the double break parentheses and define the function inside of here. And your function is always going to follow the syntax, right? The parentheses. I keep calling those parentheses. Is that parentheses? Yeah. And then the curly brackets, and then you can kind of go from there. And then the meat of your function would be defined here in many, many layers. And the reason why we do this anonymous self-executing function syntax is that we want to keep everything that we define here out of the global namespace, which is the issue that we have with pure JavaScript or even jQuery, right? So when you go to manipulating the DOM, if you do hashtag and whatever in jQuery, it's going to find every instance of that and modify it. So what we want to do, we want to keep everything scoped under our Angular app, right? And anything just defined inside of here will make a reference, will have reference to everything defined here. It's not in the global namespace. And if we want to bring anything in as an external reference, there is syntax that Angular handles for that to safely bring those in order for us to access those. So let's get rid of this. So that's why you need that, and I think it just makes your code a lot cleaner. And if things blow up, it just affects that one area and doesn't affect everything that's not Angular. So here we want to say use strict, and basically what this is going to do, this is going to just keep our syntax tight. If we try to reference a variable or something like that that's not yet defined, it will blow up. If we try to make a reference to something that's outside of this anonymous function that wasn't safely defined or explicitly defined using the Angular syntax, it will blow up. So this is more of a safety check, because usually if you do something like that in the global namespace, it becomes a red herring trying to understand what's going on. So let's go ahead and define our service. So we're going to actually only have a single service, and within that service we're going to have multiple functions. So the way that we define that service is that we make a reference to our JP module, which is JP app in our case. And because of the way that we're referencing these JS files in the master page, this is what's making it safe that I can define, or I can make a reference to something and assume that it's there because of the order that we have these dropped in. So obviously we have the Angular framework, and then we have the environment.js, which we're not defining, which we haven't played with yet. And then we have the modules, which is going to be like the key, right? That's like the plumbing that stitch everything together. The services is what we're working on now, which is going to have like our global reusable functions and objects and variables. And then the components, these are going to be our individual features that are all going to live here. And we can talk about, towards the end, I'll talk about, the structure and why I decided to go with this structure where everything is in a single file versus breaking this out into multiple files to represent the different features, which is something that may be another option as well. All right, so to define our services, that's actually going to be a factory, and it's actually service, so there's only one. And we're going to call this service, just keep it short and sweet. It's reused all over the place. And basically you call in an array of different options, right? So the first thing that we're going to do, our service will always need access to HTTP module. And what I'm going to do, this is a interesting syntax, and this is only in AngularJS, that you have to define these twice, one as a string and then one as the actual object when you want to import modules supported by or provided by Angular. So different services or modules provided by Angular. And part of this is to make sure that it can be minimized. In the event that we want to minimize this file, this is the syntax that you have to follow. So we bring in the HTTP module, we bring in the queue module, and basically this is going to allow us to do promises and defers and things along those lines. Some of that we get for free, but there's going to be certain scenarios to where we need to explicitly define a promise. Then this is the meat of it. So really this is the actual function. Then again, like I mentioned before, you have to define these twice. So we're going to go ahead and bring this in again. And then as a function, they're always in with the curly brackets. And this is the meat. Now I'm hoping, oh, I missed something. What did I miss? Oh, I did the curly braces before the end of the array tag. So let's get rid of this. Okay, all the green squigglies are gone. So I think we're okay. So this is going to define our service, and actually we're going to leave this right here. Again, this is the name, so you just remember that name. I try to keep it simple, 3 letters, right? Service. This is our external service, our repository, or whatever you want to call it. This is an Angular thing that we're bringing in. These two are the same. Actually, this piece here is optional. If you don't plan to minify this file, this is optional. Just put it in there just in case it doesn't cost you too much. This setup you only have to do once. So once we get past this wacky syntax, we're done and we're good to go. So if you need some time, just go ahead and pause the video so that way you get the syntax, the curly brackets, and all that stuff correct. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward with our component. Now in our component, what we're going to do, again, we just need to do our anonymous self-calling function. So I usually start with the curly bracket, parentheses, braces, and then go from there, then execute that way. All right, we don't give it a name or anything like that. It's anonymous. And we put in use strict. This is our safety, our check, our double checker, right? And now we're going to start to define individual components. And this is the one that's going to be repeatable. So when we get in, again, we start with the JP app.component. Oh, so now we have some Visual Studio syntax kicking in. And then for each component, you want to give it a name. So each one have to have a unique name. That's how it defines it. Again, just it's very similar to a user control. You're defining the user control. You give it a name and you pass it. This one actually, instead of an array, it actually has an object. Now, what we're going to do most of the time, like once I define this shell, basically I just copy and paste the shell and repeat it because components is something. So every feature that we're going to create, we're going to represent that with a component. And any reusable component like shares or you know share with Facebook or share with Twitter and like a sharing component that may be reused because we may use that in many different areas, right? We may have it for a job post, we may have it for a blog post, or maybe a news article or anything like that. So that's going to be reusable. So then you get into nesting these components. So basically, this is just going to be a repeatable piece within the equation, and we're going to be leveraging this time and time again, and we're actually going to live here. So in the component itself, we give it a name, then we have to set some properties for the component. So here's some, there's plenty here, right? So we're going to pick and choose. We're only going to pull off the ones that we actually need. Controller asks, this is more of an alias, right? So when you're in the template, the HTML that's going to represent this component, the HTML piece of this component, anytime that we need to pull in properties or values from this component, we're going to reference it with the VM. That's going to be our alias. Then the meat of the controller, the meat of the component is this controller. This is where you define a lot of your functions to where you actually go to the back end to get data and all this other good stuff. So for right now, we're going to keep this pretty bland, right? And we're going to make a reference to our backend service. So again, if you want this to be, I think it's, if you want this to be minifiable, I think this is the syntax. No. How come that's not highlighting? Why are these braces or not? Okay. No, scratch that. Maybe that's not right. I thought we had to define this in single quotes if we wanted to be minified, but maybe not. Let me do some research on that. Maybe with the component, maybe we're good if we want to minify this. So let's leave that blank for now. So that's just service. That's me getting off script and adding more confusion than not. Okay, so this is the controller. We add the function in, and then we define the a local variable to represent the actual controller. Without this, you can actually do this dot whatever, and then that will sort of represent the different properties within the controller. But if you define this to a local variable, this does not become so context sensitive, because depending on where you do this, it has different meanings. So a safe way to represent the controller, let's just grab this here at the controller level, set it to a local variable. So that way, anytime that we need to access anything dealing with the controller, like properties or private functions or things along those lines, we can just do a this dot, right? All right, so that's it for that property. The other property that's part of this object is the template URL, and for us this is probably the most important. And the last one, and we just stub this out, is the bindings. And this is so basically what this component is going to do is going to be represented by an HTML tag, and we can pass in, leveraging the attribute syntax on the HTML tag, we can pass it different values or parameters. And we're going to stub title out for now. So what I'm going to do Control KD just to get everything formatted and looking nice. Okay, so basically this is it. This is our base layout for our component. And obviously this will change per component, and the actual URL to the template is going to would change. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's wire up a template. So in order to do that, let's go to our apps section. We have libs, and let's add in a folder, and we'll call it templates. And this is where all of our HTML files are going to live. And the first one, let's actually look at the design. Go into the index.html, and what do you want to call this? Top navigation. So you got global. I always get these confused. So you're going to have a global navigation. You're going to have a top navigation. Let's take a look at this in Chrome. Let's see what this looks like. All right. So let's agree on this on the different navigations. Let's call this top navigation. Let's call this global navigation. I know it's a little bit confusing, but when you have this double layer, it's kind of hard to come up with some really meaningful, unique names. So we'll just call this top navigation. So what we want to do here, let's just grab this HTML, copy it out, go to our template, add a HTML page. Top nav, and we're here, and actually replace all, and then paste this in, and we're done. So now let's go back to our component. Let's rename this to top nav. I'm gonna prefix all these components with JP. It's just easier when you're looking at the HTML to easy to identify what's custom versus what's out of the box, and obviously the name will kind of give it away as well. So JP is going to be our guy, and we're just going to call this top nav. And then in the HTML URL, right now, let's just stick with this hard coding this. I'm going to show you where this could be more dynamic, and this is going to be important, especially when you start looking at this in different site collections. We're going to have to dynamically go and grab the base URL for the site collection and then append it here. Right now, this is going to assume that you're at the root. I know if you're dealing with a enterprise environment or a company environment where you had to request a site collection, 9 times out of 10, you did not get the root. So in order to represent your URL for your site collection, there's another step that we'll do. But for right now, let's keep it hard coded and straightforward, just so that we can see how this actually works, and then we will come back and then drop in the dynamic component, dynamic pieces. Okay, so style library, job portal. We're just putting in a path to our templates, app templates, right? Yeah, that's right. Okay, and then which template do we want? We called it top nav. And that's it. So now we have this all wired up. If we want to go into the master page, let's go down to the section where we actually have the top nav. Yeah. All this HTML. Wait, what? Oh, okay, that's the footer. Okay, so we actually, so we have this already. Yeah, okay. So we can clean this up a bit now that we have our component kicking in. So this is our container. This is the guy that we just dropped in the template, right? So let's go ahead and rip this out. And you can replace this with jp-top-nav. And I think you can do self-closing. And you remember in the title, in the binding, we defined the title. This is how you would pass that parameter. So you can actually have a token here or anything here to pass it to make it reusable. We can actually wrap this inside of a SharePoint web part and I've done this before, and it's actually make these a lot reusable. You can use a web part property to actually pass in data here, and then that would in turn pass it to the Angular component. So for the top nav, this is silly. There's no need to pass in an attribute, right? Because there's nothing reused there. But you saw something, right? You saw this JP-top nav hyphen, and you're wondering like, okay, why, where are you getting these names? And this is something that's a Angularism, to where it doesn't do the camel casing in that HTML tag. You actually have to represent the camel casing with a hyphen. So here it would just be JP hyphen to represent the capital T, and then obviously lowercase t, and then another hyphen to represent the capital N, and that's how you end up with um, the this notation here. All right, so I'm gonna go in with the self-closing tag, and hopefully this works. Let's just see what happens. I'm already wired up to where I have my style library displayed in Windows Explorer view. So let's just go ahead and publish this out. So I'll publish out the master. Make sure there are no errors. All right, so that got pushed out. And then because I added a lot to the app, I'm gonna just grab it at the app folder level, and then just publish that whole folder, and that would in turn publish everything underneath it. All right, cool, great. All right, so what I want to do, let me use Chrome. Again, this is just personal preference. I like the developer tools in Chrome better than the other browsers, only because I'm used to it and something I started with a long time ago. All right, so now it looks like we have our top nav, but we also wiped out everything below it. And my guess is, let me just move this guy here. I like this at the bottom. My guess is the self-closing tag. Let's see if there's any errors. Undefined. Okay, Deshaun, you have a syntax error. Oh, service is undefined. Okay. If service is undefined. Deshaun, what did you do? I'm trying to see if this is under components or if this is in the module itself. And usually you get like a file reference to where it kind of blew up. All right, let's see here. My guess is the component. Let's see, service is undefined. One second here. Let me reference my working solution. Why is service undefined? JP app, all right, component. If you go to services, oh, how much of this need to be defined? JP app factory service. Let's do this. Let's just return. No, actually, let me save this. Let's go back to component. We actually don't need this right now. All right, so let's not wrestle with it. Let's not wrestle with it. Okay, so let's push this out. Let's see if this gets rid of the error. And hit refresh. Okay, so that got rid of that error. Let me do a control F5 just to make sure. Okay. And you can kind of see how everything's trying to flash in, but it stops, and we have the top nav, which is my guess. It doesn't like that self-closing tag. And I haven't nailed this down yet, like why it works sometimes and why in other times it doesn't. But I definitely use self-closing in other areas. So let's just see if that's the issue. So I'm gonna add an end tag to that. Go back, hit refresh, and see what happens. Yeah, I liked it. Interesting. All right, so now outside of service needing a little bit more work to get defined, we can actually clean up our master page. So let's add in the other components to make our master page super, super clean. And to do that, let's go here. This is our header, right? Let's just grab this. Oops, we actually want to do a cut. Let's get it out of there. Go to templates, add in HTML page, and then we just I'm gonna call it GLB -header to represent the global header. Replace all this with our HTML. You can do a Control-KD to get everything formatted nice and neat. Save this off. Let's go back and get the other one. What else is here? The footer and the copyright. So I'm gonna grab all of this, exit out, go to templates, GLB footer. Select all, replace it, save it. All right, and now we have to define our components. Again, this is a natural thing. In JavaScript, I think I do more copy and pasting than anything else. So JP header, and here we just redefine this to the URL to header, GLB header, right? And same for the footer, JP footer. And that's the thing, once you have this plumbing in place, it becomes extremely easy, like actually ridiculously easy. GLB footer, right? I think everything here is good. So now I'm just going to our master, and the header was here. So JP header, and then in the footer, JP footer. Save it. So now if we go to master, just go ahead and publish this out. And then let's go back to our app folder, publish that out. Just thinking. All right, let's go back here, hit refresh. All right, now obviously we didn't see a change, right? Because we replaced everything that was there. So we just assume this works. So now let's actually make a change inside of the template file, and you should see that represented there. So let's just go home. Let's say home from template. Just push this one little guy out because that's where we made our change. And come up here, hit refresh. Home from template. So we are wired up. It's not smoke and mirrors, it's a real thing. All right, so that's how you do it. So now if you look at your master page, it's super clean. We have a lot of flexibility now. I think things get very interesting when we start to go in the design itself. Well, where's the master page? Yeah, so now our master page is super clean, right? So you just have this guy, and this guy, and then all of this is coming in. Now, the one thing that you cannot do with the template, now actually I say cannot do, I haven't tried it, but I think you probably can do it, is like represent the HTML, I'm sorry, the SharePoint controls within the template itself. Like if you want to go and say, hey, let's just move all this to a template and then deal with it that way. That's something I haven't tried. So if you want to try that out, that's fine. I don't know if this will work or not. It'll be, you know what, let's just try it. Let's just cut this out. Let's go to a header. And it's at the very bottom, right? Let's just drop it in here. It will be here. All right, this is HTML, so it doesn't care about this. It's not going to do any syntax check or anything like that. Let's just push this out. Wait. We cut that guy, right? Yeah, it's gone. All right, so let's publish. So let's publish this. Let's push that out. And let's publish the header. My guess is you're going to get an error. And I don't think Angular is going to throw the error. I think it's SharePoint's going to throw the error. And you know, it's all about timing, right? Who gets it first? Whoa, are you serious? Is this actually working? Wait, how do I know if this is working? So it's supposed to bring in the title, the page title? How do I know this is working? Home, that's it. Wow, dude. Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's do this. Page title is, and I don't, sometimes you don't even have to save. Actually, all the time, you don't have to save. You can just go straight to publish and it would say that change for you and everything. It's actually pretty cool. Wow, dude. I mean, that's a surprise for me. Okay, I didn't realize we can do SharePoint tags in there too. Okay. Well, that gives us a lot of flexibility. Yeah, that gives us a lot of flexibility. Yeah, so this master page is super clean now. Super, super clean. Um, yeah, okay. This is it. I mean, all your customization, right, is represented in the SharePoint master page is this chunk here. 408 to 417. That's it. Everything else is greatly encapsulated under these components. Right now, we can do very cool things like if we were going to do this login page, that would just be a REST call to do all that good stuff. You will see that we're going to replace this top navigation with some dynamic REST API calls and have that being managed by the navigation module under site settings, and you know, get these things to really start to feel a little bit natural and like a real site. I'm very surprised with this. I did not know that you can drop the SharePoint components inside of a Angular template. So I learned that today. Thank you. All right, that's it for this video. I'll catch you in the next video where we actually start to bring in additional components, the ones that supposed to be here in the middle that we put on in the queue on the back burner. But so now let's go ahead and address those, follow our same model, and then hopefully get into some REST API calls in the next video. We'll see how far we get. All right, take care.